Welcome back. Come on in. It's raining again, so please close the door behind you. This particular story has been waiting a long time to be properly read. I'm Mith, and this is the History Sanctuary. Please, come sit with me by the fire. Let me pour you a drink. Whether you're settling in to learn something new, filling the background while you work or study, or simply letting the past carry you gently off to sleep, you are exactly where you need to be. Tonight, we will be descending into a deep cave beneath the world and discussing an ongoing controversy about some tiny, strange cousins of ours. This is a place where history is told quietly, carefully, the way it deserves to be told. Not as a list of dates to memorize, but as the story of real people in real places, doing remarkable things that most of the world has long since forgotten. Everything you hear in the sanctuary comes from real research, real discoveries, real scholars, and this is a real voice. I'm not generated nor synthetic, just me sitting in my little library, turning pages by the firelight and sharing what I find. If you're planning to drift off to sleep tonight, please do me a favor and like, follow, and leave a comment before you close your eyes. The algorithm won't wake you up to remind you, but I'd love to have you back again. And for everyone else here, welcome to the archive. The kettle's on. The rain isn't stopping anytime soon. And we have so much to talk about. I want you to imagine a passageway, not a comfortable one, a crack in the rock, barely wider than your shoulders, then even narrower. You are on your back, one arm above your head, pressing yourself forward through a gap that has been measured at 7.5 inches wide, the length of a pencil. Below you, darkness. Ahead, more darkness. And somewhere at the bottom of this system of shafts and crawls and steep vertical drops, almost 100 feet underground and nearly 100 yards from any known entrance, something is waiting that has never been seen before. This is Rising Star Cave, South Africa, and the year is 2013. What they found at the bottom of that passage changed our understanding of what it means to be human, and what has been claimed about it since has started one of the most fascinating arguments in modern paleoanthropology. Tonight, we open the story of Homo Naledi. Rising Star Cave sits in a valley in South Africa's Gauteng province, about 50 kilometers northwest of Johannesburg, in a region known as the cradle of humankind. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a place already rich with ancient bones and ancient secrets, where the limestone beneath your feet holds millions of years of history. Recreational cavers had been exploring Rising Star for decades by then. It was known territory, mapped, charted, familiar. On September 13th, 2013, two recreational cavers, Rick Hunter and Stephen Tucker, were exploring the system when they found a small entrance to a previously unknown remote chamber. They climbed down into it and discovered the floor littered with human-like bones. They were not scientists, but they knew enough to know what they were looking at. They took photographs. They showed them to a colleague. The colleague showed them to Lee Berger, a paleoanthropologist at a university in Johannesburg, and one of the most prolific fossil hunters working in Africa. Berger could not access the chamber himself. It was too narrow for him. So he did something unusual. He posted a message on Facebook calling for 6 qualified researchers with cave experience who were petite enough to fit through the smallest spaces. He called them his underground astronauts. 6 women scientists answered. They were small enough, experienced enough, and willing and brave enough to lower themselves into a place no scientist had ever been. What they brought back out would take 2 years to fully understand. In November 2013 and March 2014, over 1,550 specimens from at least 15 individuals were recovered from the Naledi chamber, and another 131 specimens from at least 3 individuals from the Lesedi chamber. This excavation remains the largest collection of single hominin species ever found in Africa. Men, women, children, elderly, all ages, all stages of life, represented in one dark room at the bottom of a cave that can only be reached by crawling through spaces no large predator could ever follow. In fact, the only animal bones that were found there were from an owl. They named the species Homo Naledi. Naledi means star in the Sesotho language, named for the cave, named for the stars above the cave, named perhaps for something they were only beginning to sense about these bones. The species was formally announced on September 10th, 2015. And then the questions began. What were they? Here is where Homo Naledi becomes one of the strangest beings in the human family tree. They were small. They averaged about 4 feet 9 inches in height and weighed roughly 88 pounds. By any modern standard, they would have looked slight, compact, almost delicate. Their brains were tiny. Brain size was roughly 560 cubic centimeters for males and 465 for females, only slightly larger than a chimpanzee's. For comparison, your brain holds around 1,300 cubic centimeters. Homo Naledi's brain was roughly the size of an orange. And yet, their hands were remarkable. The wrists, fingertips, and proportions of the fingers were largely human-like, suggesting sophisticated manipulative ability. Their feet were almost indistinguishable from ours. They walked upright with a human stride. Their teeth were small and refined, closer to modern humans than to earlier species. But their shoulders were those of a climber, ape-like, built for trees. Their pelvis flared wide like our ancient ancestor Lucy. Their fingers, while human in shape at the tips, were curved along the bones, curved more than even the Australopithecines, built for gripping branches. Researchers described it as mosaic evolution, anatomical features from different eras of human development assembled into a single being. The morphology of the skull and teeth was mostly consistent with the genus Homo, but the brain size was within the range of Australopithecus. The lower limb was largely Homo-like, but the pelvis appeared to be flared, like that of species 2 million years older. Paleoanthropologist John Hawkes put it beautifully. He said it was like evolution had been crafting us from the outside in. The parts that touch the world, the hands, the feet, had become human long before the core had caught up. When Homo Naledi was announced in 2015, one crucial detail was missing. No one had dated the bones. Without a date, they were fascinating, but incomplete. Scientists assumed from their primitive features that they were very old, perhaps 2 million years, an ancient relative long gone before our own story really began. In 2017, the dates were announced. The Naledi remains were between 335,000 and 236,000 years old. I imagine that room went very quiet for a moment. 236,000 years ago, at a time when our own ancestors, Homo sapiens, early modern humans, were already walking in Africa, where Neanderthals were ranging across Europe, when Denisovans were spreading through Asia. A little-brained shadow lineage had been lingering on, perhaps from as far back as 2 million years ago, surviving unchanged in a continental cul-de-sac, while bigger brain species evolved and spread it around. They were not our ancestors. They were our contemporaries. Small-brained, ancient-looking people, still alive in the shadow of our own emergence. The previous assumption that bigger brains inevitably replaced smaller ones was not quite right. Nature, it turned out, was keeping options open. But the bones themselves were only the first mystery. The chamber where they were found, the main Naledi chamber, is almost 100 feet underground, accessible only through shafts and crawls that would have been almost as difficult for Homo Naledi as for modern humans. The chamber is around 80 meters from any known entrance and must have always been in complete darkness. There are no large predator bones mixed in, no signs of flooding that could have swept the bodies there, no animals at all really, just Homo Naledi in the dark, deep in the earth. How did over 15 individuals of all ages end up in that specific deep place? The excavation team's answer was radical. They were put there deliberately by other Homo Naledi. In 2015, Berger and colleagues concluded that the bodies had to have been deliberately carried and placed into the chamber because they appeared to have been intact when first deposited, with no evidence of trauma from being dropped in or signs of predation. This concept was already controversial. Deliberate disposal of the dead requires planning, shared intent, a concept of what death means. These were beings with the brains the size of an orange. The field was skeptical. Some were more than skeptical. Professor Chris Stringer of the National History Museum in London offered an alternative. He suggested it was possible that, now and again, individuals sought refuge deep in the cave to escape from predators or other humans. Without light and without the ability to climb back out, once deep enough, there may have been no way back. Over hundreds or thousands of years, this behavior could have led to an accumulation of bodies with no intention required, just darkness and eventual death. Two very different stories from the same room. Lee Berger went back into the cave in 2022, losing 50 pounds so that he could fit further into the narrow shafts for research that he wanted to see with his own eyes. Then, soon after, the controversy that had simmered for 8 years erupted in June of 2023. Berger and his team announced 3 things simultaneously with great fanfare: a Netflix documentary and a front-page coverage in the New York Times. First, they had found burial features, shallow depressions in the cave floor around which the bones were arranged, bodies placed in crouched positions, possibly with a stone tool left beside one hand. The oldest intentional burials in the world, beating the previous record by perhaps 160,000 years. Second, they reported that they had found evidence of fire, charcoal on cave ceilings, evidence of hearths. Someone had brought light into these passages, and light this deep in the earth would have required fire. Third, that they had found art on a rocky pillar near where the bodies lay, deeply impressed cross-hatchings, geometric shapes, squares, triangles, crosses, and X-shapes carved into the dolomite wall. The surfaces appeared to have been prepared and smoothed. If all of this was true, it was world-changing. A species with a brain 1/3 the size of ours had been burying its dead, lighting its way with fire, and marking its passage with symbols. Everything we thought we knew about the relationship between brain size and complex behavior was wrong. Princeton anthropologist Agustin Fuentes, a co-author, says, "We have what looks like burials and what look like engravings right beside them, with no evidence of any other living thing except for Homo Naledi being down here. This is truly remarkable." And then the peer reviews came out. The journal that published the papers, eLife, has a model where papers are accepted and then peer reviews are posted publicly alongside of them for anyone to read. The peer reviews were unanimous in considering the evidence inadequate in its present form. Despite this, the papers remained available and were actively communicated to the press and on social media without yet integrating any of the reviewers' comments. The criticisms were specific and substantial. On the burials, critics pointed out that burials usually involve articulated skeletons, bodies intact, arranged deliberately. But in this case, the hominin bones were not articulated, but scattered. Some remains were found in an almost vertical position, very unlike what would be expected if someone had dug a grave and placed a body inside it. On the fire, critics noted that there is no confirmed evidence that Homo Naledi lit fires in the cave. What appeared to be burning locations could just be manganese staining. The charcoal found in the cave had not yet been dated to establish when it was deposited or by whom. On the art, one reviewer wrote that the engravings had not been dated and that to assume no other individual had entered the cave system between the time of Homo Naledi and 40 years ago was an unrealistic and faulty assumption. The marks might have been made in a much more recent historic time by modern humans who had squeezed into the cave, just as Berger's team or the cavers had done. And crucially, researchers noted the numerous examples of shallow, cross-hatched, and patterned natural erosion lines can be found throughout the Dolomite Formation that hosts the Rising Star Cave. The marks the team had called engravings could simply be the work of time and water and stone. To be fair to Berger and his colleagues, the story does not end at the peer reviews. The team argued that the critics were applying standards designed for surface sites to an extraordinary underground environment, that the absence of articulation doesn't rule out burial. Bodies decompose, bones scatter over thousands of years, that the geometry of the cave system made it virtually impossible for the bones to have arrived by water or a predator, that someone had to have brought light into these passages to move bodies that deep underground, making fire almost a logical necessity, even if it couldn't be directly proven. Between July and September of 2025, Berger and colleagues officially published 3 peer-reviewed papers presenting possible evidence supporting that Homo Naledi buried their dead near carvings on the cave walls. The debate has not ended, though. If anything, it has sharpened. Some reviewers now support the burial hypothesis. Others remain firmly unconvinced. The engravings are still undated. The fire is still contested. That is not a closed verdict. It is science in the middle of arguing with itself, which is, to be honest, exactly what science is supposed to do. Step back from the argument for a moment and look at what is not in dispute. Homo Naledi existed. Hundreds of their bones are real and dated and described. A small-brained, ancient-looking human survived in southern Africa until at least 236,000 years ago, alongside of Homo sapiens, with hands built for tools and feet built for walking, distant cousins, simply on a different path. They were in that cave, in the dark, hundreds of meters from any entrance, in a place no large animal can follow, again and again and again, represented with men, women, children of different ages and different times. Consider the possibilities. Either Homo Naledi was capable, with a brain the size of an orange, of behaviors we thought required a brain like ours, or they stumbled into that darkness again and again across thousands of years and left behind one of the most extraordinary collections of bones in the history of our species. Neither answer is comfortable, but both are astonishing. Berger himself said it best. He said, "What Naledi has taught me is to expect the unexpected. We as scientists and explorers often walk in with enormous preconceptions. Naledi has told us to check those at the door. No matter what side of this controversy you choose to take, provided you actually pick a side, I believe that is an insight we can all learn from." A cave in South Africa, a passage barely wide enough to breathe through, 15 individuals laid in the dark. We do not know if they were placed there with intention. We do not know if the scratches on the wall mean something. We do not know if fire burned in those passages to light the way. We can absolutely hope for more research to answer these questions. This story is far from over, because we know they were there, small, ancient, and still mysterious, alive while we were taking our first steps, gone now, leaving behind nothing but bones and questions and the faint possibility that the story of what it means to be human We covered the Denisovans last time, a whole human species discovered from a single finger bone. In case you missed it, it's waiting for you, along with a lot of relaxing music right here at the sanctuary. If you enjoyed relaxing by the fire with me today, please subscribe, like, and let me know what other ancient stories you would like to hear. We have a lot of history to unpack, and I hope to see you soon. The kettle is always on.